ether, searching for the fifth element of the ancients. Ancient Greeks believed that everything was filled with ether, just like Nikola Tesla believed. What is ether? Well, that's simple. Ether, so also spelled E-T-H-E-R, is the material that fills the region of the universe of the terrestrial sphere, or at least it was according to ancient science. Ether was also known as the fifth element, or quintessence, and the concept of ether was used in multiple theories scientists postulated to explain natural phenomena such as gravity and light. The origins of ether can be traced back to ancient Greece, and according to Greek mythology, ether was thought to be the pure essence that the gods breathed, which filled the space in the heavens where they lived. It was a heavenly form of air that was only created in the heavens. Mortals breathe oxygen and gods breathe ether. The mythological personification of ether as the son of Erebus, the personification of darkness, and Nyx, the personification of night. The fifth element? Plato described ether as being the most translucent kind of air, which is called by the name of ether in his works Timaeus. While Plato does refer to the concept of ether when describing air, he was a firm believer in the classical system of four elements. The classical system of four elements is something everyone is familiar with. It's a belief that the four elements that everything is composed of: earth, fire, air, and water. This would seemingly leave no space for ether, but this is only the beginning of the complications. The next philosopher who wrote about ether, or the fifth element, was Aristotle. He was a student of Plato, and we know Aristotle was also the teacher of Alexander the Great. In Aristotle's book On the Heavens, he explains how the four classical elements were known to change. Ether, or as Aristotle called it, the first element was found in the heavens and the celestial realm, was unlike the four elements. Ether was not dry or wet, and it was not hot or cold. Ether was unable to have motion of quality or motion of quantity, but it was able to move in a circular pattern. In his book, Aristotle describes how the heavens and celestial spheres were made of ether and contained the stars and planets. This belief that these ether spheres moved in a circular motion is what led Aristotle to explain why the natural orbit of stars and planets is in a circular form. This is where the whole fifth element thing really started. It's worth noting, however, that Aristotle never called this fifth element ether. Quintessence, gravity, and light. During the medieval ages, alchemists called this fifth element quintessence. Quintessence was believed to be nearly identical to what the heavenly bodies were composed of, just like ether as described by the ancient Greeks. Alchemists reported that there was hardly any quintessence that could be found in the terrestrial sphere, which makes sense because quintessence or ether was a heavenly element. Due to the scarce levels of ether on Earth, the planet could be impacted by what was occurring within the heavenly bodies. Quintessence became incredibly popular among medical alchemists across Europe. Medicinal alchemists tried to separate and isolate this ether in an attempt to add it to medicine, tonics, and elixirs. Because quintessence was pure and of heavenly quality, quote unquote, it was believed that if a mortal were to consume some of this pure element, it could cure them of any illnesses or injuries. Ancient alchemists would attempt to gather ether by distilling alcohol multiple times before adding the distilled alcohol to the medication prescribed to the ill. As physics began to develop further in the 18th century, models called ether theories were developed in an effort to explain the existence of gravitational and electromagnetic forces. The ether in physics was very different from the idea of ether as proposed by the ancient Greeks. It was not a celestial or heavenly element. It was an element required for gravity or the motion of light to exist. Ether was seen as the medium through which light waves traveled through space. This concept was called luminiferous ether, and until 1887 it was the prominent explanation for how light could travel through a vacuum. Between April and July 1887, American physicists Albert Michelson and Edward Morley performed experiments to measure the relative motion of the Earth and luminiferous ether. The experiment the men performed compared the speed of light in perpendicular directions in an attempt to detect the relative motion of matter through luminiferous ether. The result of Michelson-Morley experiment was negative. The scientists were not able to detect or find or record any significant difference between the speed of light in the direction of movement through the presumed ether and the speed at right angles. The result of the Michelson-Morley experiment is seen as the first attempt of evidence against ether theories in physics. Also, this experiment led to research that resulted in the concept of special relativity created by Albert Einstein. Special relativity, also known as a special theory of relativity, is a scientific theory about the relationship between both space and time. Einstein's theory of special relativity was based on two main ideas. One, the laws of physics are identical in all frames of reference with no acceleration. Two, the speed of light in a vacuum is the same for all observers, regardless of the motion of the light source or the observer. The theory of relativity was developed because Einstein wanted to understand why the current equations of electromagnetism were in direct opposition to Newtonian mechanics, and the null result of the Michelson-Morley experiment failed to detect the motion of the Earth against luminiferous ether. Again, Einstein's theory of special relativity has been proven to be the most accurate model of motion when both quantum and gravitational effects are negligible or insignificant. These two ideas Einstein postulated in his theory led to one of the most well-known equations, E equals mc squared, which calculates the speed of light in a vacuum. The Michelson-Morley experiment and further developments by other physicists and Einstein officially disproved the concept of luminiferous ether and is no longer considered an actual element or force that affects light or gravity. This is by Lauren Dillon on Historic Mysteries. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.